Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. How do you deal with a neighbor who gives you terrible advice on purpose? Mine told me to build a fence to solve the problem of her blocking my driveway, so I did. And it ended with her hiring a crane to lift her car out of my yard. Here's what happened. I bought my house about 2 years ago. It's a modest single-family home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nothing fancy, but it's mine. One of the things I loved most about it was the driveway. It's long, runs along the side of the house, and gives me plenty of space to park without feeling cramped. My property line runs right alongside it, with just a few feet separating my driveway from my neighbor's yard. For the first year and a half, my neighbors were an older retired couple. They were quiet, friendly, and we got along great. They moved out last spring to be closer to their grandkids, and the house sat empty for a couple of months before someone new moved in. That's when I met Jessica. Jessica was in her early 30s, single, and worked some kind of corporate job that seemed to require a lot of travel. She drove a sleek black Audi that she was clearly very proud of. I introduced myself the day she moved in, helped her carry a few boxes, and everything seemed fine at first. She was polite enough, if a bit standoffish, but I figured she was just stressed from the move. The problem started about a month after she settled in. Jessica's driveway was a standard 2-car width, and she had a garage, but for some reason she preferred to park in her driveway at an angle that left her car jutting out slightly. Not a huge deal at first. It was annoying, but I could still get in and out of my driveway without too much trouble. Then it got worse. Every few days, her car would be positioned in such a way that it was blocking my driveway just enough that I couldn't comfortably get my car in or out without risking scraping against hers or my own fence. The first couple of times I knocked on her door and politely asked her to move it. She'd sigh dramatically, but she'd move it. The third time she told me I was being too picky about my parking and that I should just learn to maneuver better. I'm a patient person, I really am. But there's only so much you can take before it starts to grate on you. I tried to let it go. I figured maybe she just didn't realize how inconvenient it was, but the problem kept happening. I'd come home from work to find her car positioned in a way that made it nearly impossible to pull into my own driveway. I'd have to park on the street and walk up, which wasn't the end of the world, but it was my driveway. I shouldn't have to park on the street because my neighbor couldn't be bothered to park straight. I tried talking to her again and again. Each time she'd give me some variation of, "It's not that bad," or "You're overreacting." Once, she even suggested I park on the street permanently to avoid the issue altogether. That's when I knew this wasn't going to resolve itself through polite conversation. Things came to a head on a Monday morning in late September. I walked out to my driveway at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand, ready to head to work, but I couldn't. Her car wasn't just partially blocking my driveway this time, it was completely blocking it. The entire front end of her Audi was angled directly across the entrance to my driveway, making it physically impossible for me to get my car out. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, waiting for my brain to catch up with what I was seeing. Then I walked over and knocked on her door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. I was going to be late for work. I ended up having to get a ride from a coworker who lived nearby, which was humiliating. When I got home that evening, her car was gone, parked normally in her own driveway like nothing had happened. I knocked on her door. This time she answered. "Your car was blocking my driveway this morning," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I couldn't get to work." She shrugged. "Sorry, I was in a hurry. It won't happen again." But it did. Tuesday morning, same thing. Her car was blocking my driveway. I knocked. No answer. I called. Voicemail. I had to beg another ride to work, and my boss was starting to notice I was late. By Wednesday, I was fuming. I knocked on her door that evening after I got home, and when she answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "This has to stop," I said. "You're blocking my driveway every morning and I can't get to work. I've asked you nicely multiple times. This is ridiculous." She looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as smug indifference. "If you have such a problem with where I park," she said, crossing her arms, "maybe you should just build a fence so you don't have to look at my car anymore. Or better yet, maybe if you defined your property better, we wouldn't have these misunderstandings about where I can park." I stood there, letting her words sink in. She was practically daring me. "You know what?" I said slowly. "That's actually an excellent suggestion." She looked momentarily confused, then shrugged again and closed the door in my face. That's when I decided to take her advice. Exactly. Thursday morning, her car was blocking my driveway again. 5th day in a row. I didn't even bother knocking this time. Instead, I called in sick to work, which I hated doing, but I had a plan forming in my mind and I needed the day to set it in motion. First, I called a survey company to come out and do an official property line survey. I explained it was urgent due to a dispute with a neighbor. They said they normally had a 2-week wait, but they'd had a cancellation and could squeeze me in for Monday morning if I paid a rush fee of $300. It was steep, but I didn't care. I took it immediately, even though it meant taking another day off work. Second, I called a fence company. I explained that I needed a fence installed as quickly as possible along my property line. The guy I spoke with said once I had the survey results, they could start work within a few days. I scheduled them tentatively for Thursday, giving me time to get everything in order. I explained what I wanted, a 6-foot privacy fence running along the property line between my driveway and her yard with gates at both ends for access. He gave me a quote, and I accepted it on the spot. Third, I called the non-emergency police line to document what was happening. The officer I spoke with explained that while blocking someone's driveway access could be addressed, they'd need to verify the property lines first, and the person would need to be present to be cited. Without her answering the door, there wasn't much they could do immediately, but he said he'd send an officer out to take a look and leave a warning notice on her car. An officer came by that afternoon. He took photos, left a citation notice on her windshield, and told me to call again if it continued. When Jessica got home that evening and found the notice, she came storming over to my house, absolutely livid. "You called the cops on me?" she shouted. "Are you serious?" "You've blocked my driveway for 5 days straight," I said calmly. "I asked you to stop. You didn't. So yes, I called the police." "This is harassment," she yelled. "No," I said. "Blocking someone's driveway repeatedly is harassment. Calling the police about it is called problem solving." She stood there fuming, then stormed back to her house without another word. Friday morning, her car was in the same spot, blocking my driveway. Again, I didn't bother knocking. I just took a few photos for documentation and waited. Over the weekend, I stewed in frustration. I kept replaying her words in my head. Maybe you should just build a fence. Maybe if you defined your property better. Fine, I would. Monday morning, the survey team arrived early. It took them most of the day, but by late afternoon, I had official documentation showing exactly where my property line was. And sure enough, it ran right along the edge of my driveway, exactly where I thought it did. Jessica's car, when she parked it blocking my driveway, was always on her property, but it was positioned in such a way that it blocked my access to the public road, which was technically illegal according to the officer I'd spoken with earlier. But more importantly, I now had legal documentation of my property boundaries. I called the fence company immediately and confirmed that they could start on Thursday. They said they'd have a crew out first thing in the morning. On Tuesday evening, I did something that I knew would either make this situation resolve itself or push it over the edge. I sent Jessica a text message. "Hi Jessica, just wanted to let you know I'm having a fence installed along the property line starting Thursday morning. If your car is parked where it usually is, it might be in the way of the installation. You might want to move it before 8 a.m. Thursday, just a heads up." Her response came an hour later. "Not my problem. You should plan better." Perfect. Wednesday came and went. I made sure to document with photos that her car was once again parked in the exact spot it had been all week, blocking my driveway. Thursday morning, I took another day off work. I'd already used up most of my goodwill with my boss, but this was worth it. At 8 a.m. sharp, the fence company arrived with a truck full of materials, posts, panels, concrete mix, and all the equipment they needed. The crew chief, a guy named Mike, walked the property line with me, survey results in hand, and confirmed exactly where the fence would go. "Just so you're aware," Mike said, looking at Jessica's car, "if we build along this line, her car's gonna be right in the middle of it." "I know," I said. "I warned her. She didn't move it." Mike shrugged. "Your property, your call. We'll work around it." And they did. The crew started by marking out where all the posts would go, driving stakes into the ground with string lines running between them. Then they began setting posts. They worked methodically, digging holes, setting posts in concrete, making sure everything was level and square. By late morning, Jessica's car was surrounded on 2 sides by posts set in concrete. Mike explained they'd need to set overnight before they could hang the panels, so they'd be back Friday and Saturday to finish. Around noon, Jessica came home for lunch. I watched from my window as she pulled into her driveway, got out, and froze when she saw what was happening. She walked over to where the crew was working. "What the hell is this?" she demanded. Mike, who had clearly dealt with angry people before, stayed calm. "We're installing a fence along the property line, ma'am." "You can't do this," she said, her voice rising. "That's my car." The fence is being built on his property, Mike said, nodding toward me. We're not touching your car or your property, but if your car is parked on the line, there's not much we can do about that. This is insane, she shouted. You can't just trap my car. I walked over at that point. I sent you a text on Tuesday, I said. I told you exactly when the fence was being installed. I told you to move your car. You chose not to. I didn't think you were serious, she said. Why wouldn't I be serious? I asked. You told me to build a fence to define my property better, so that's what I'm doing. She stared at me, her face turning red, then pulled out her phone and started making calls. First, she called the police. An officer arrived about 20 minutes later, the same one who had left her the citation earlier in the week. He took one look at the situation and shook his head slightly. Is the fence being built on his property? The officer asked Mike. Yes, sir, Mike said, showing him the survey results. We've got documentation of the property line. Everything we're doing is on his side of it. The officer looked at Jessica. Then there's nothing illegal happening here. You'll need to figure out how to move your car, but he's within his rights to build a fence on his property. Jessica looked like she was about to explode, but the officer's presence kept her from completely losing it. After he left, she tried a different approach. She called a towing company. They came out, took one look at the situation, and told her they couldn't help. The car wasn't illegally parked, and there was no way to get a tow truck in to hook it up with posts already set on multiple sides. She even considered climbing over the fence to get into her car, but realized that even if she could access it, she had no way to drive it out with posts set in concrete on 3 sides. By the end of Thursday, all the posts were set, including the ones on either side of her car. Mike and his crew packed up for the day, telling me they'd be back Friday morning to start hanging the panels. Jessica spent the evening making phone calls. I could hear her through the walls yelling at someone about lawyers and property rights and harassment. I didn't care. I had my survey, I had my permits. Everything I was doing was completely legal. Friday morning, the crew came back and started installing the fence panels. They worked around her car, building the fence right up to one side of it, then continuing on the other side. By Friday evening, 2 full sides were up. Saturday morning, they finished the job. By early afternoon, the fence was complete. 6 feet tall, solid privacy panels running the entire length of my property line, and right in the middle of it, enclosed on 3 sides, was Jessica's black Audi. She couldn't open the driver's side door more than a few inches before it hit the fence. The passenger side had maybe a foot of clearance. There was no way to drive it forward or backward without smashing into the fence. She came over Saturday afternoon, practically in tears. "Please," she said, "you have to take down part of the fence. I need my car." "I warned you," I said, "multiple times. You chose not to move it." "I'll move it now," she said. "Just take down a section so I can get it out, and I'll never park there again." "The fence is already built," I said. "Taking it down and rebuilding it would cost me thousands of dollars. Why should I pay for that because you ignored my warnings?" "You did this on purpose," she said. "I built a fence on my property," I said. "You told me to define my property lines better. I did exactly what you suggested." She tried to argue more, but I went inside and closed the door. Over the next week, Jessica's car sat there, boxed in by the fence she had dared me to build. She called towing companies, she called the city, she called the police again, she even called a lawyer from what I heard later. Every answer came back the same. The fence was permitted, it was on my property, and I had warned her before the work started. The car had not been touched. The fence had not crossed onto her land. Nobody had damaged anything. She had simply ignored a written warning because she assumed I was bluffing. Eventually, she found a solution. She hired a crane company to lift the Audi out. I was not home when it happened, but my other neighbor Tom gave me the full report later. Apparently, it took about 3 hours, drew a small audience, and cost her close to $2,000. When I got home that evening, the Audi was back in her driveway, parked perfectly straight, well away from my property line. Funny how fast people learn to park correctly when the alternative involves a crane. She did try to sue me in small claims court. She claimed I had built the fence maliciously and caused her unnecessary expense. The judge looked at the survey, the permit, the text message warning her before construction, the police report about her blocking my driveway, and the photos showing her car exactly where she had chosen to leave it. The case was dismissed. The judge even noted that I had given her clear warning, and that her decision not to move the vehicle was her responsibility. After that, Jessica gave up. She avoided me completely, which was fine by me. Her car stayed inside her own driveway, parked like a normal person's car. No more blocking my entrance, no more smug comments about my driving, no more suggestions that I should park on the street because she could not be bothered to angle her Audi properly. About 6 months later, a for sale sign went up in her yard. Tom told me she was moving to a condo downtown where she would not have to worry about driveways or property lines. A young couple with a toddler bought the house and they have been great neighbors ever since. The fence is still there. I added a gate at the far end for easier access to my backyard, and I planted climbing roses along part of it. It actually looks nice now, and it gives my driveway a clean private border. Every now and then, when I pull into my completely unobstructed driveway, I think about Jessica's black Audi sitting there boxed in by the exact fence she told me to build. She told me to define my property better, so I did. Exactly. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened to me a while back, but it recently came back to me. I used to work for an armored car company. I did that for a few years while I was in university and waiting for a position in what would eventually become my future career. It was good money, and plenty of people did it as their full-time job, but I wanted more out of life than a mindless routine. Because I was classified as part-time, I did not have a set shift. I mostly covered for people when they were sick, on vacation, working unscheduled shifts, or when shifts were created specifically for part-timers. Even though I was technically part-time, I was working full-time hours almost every week. Most of the full-time workers loved working with me. The way the company worked, you were scheduled for a 13-hour shift. However, if you completed your run in less time than that, you still got paid for the full shift. I was young, moved quickly, and did not care about breaks if it meant I could get paid for 3 or 4 hours while sitting at home instead of working. So whenever I took over for someone older who was mostly on autopilot, I could usually get their coworker home in a fraction of the time. One of the full-time workers, a real Karen type whom I will call Kyle, was the worst. For some reason, he took it upon himself to tattle on people for anything he did not like. If someone was not wearing their collared shirt under their sweater, he would run to management. For context, working in summer heat inside a literal metal box while wearing a bulletproof vest makes you want to shed layers. If someone wore black pants instead of blue pants, he told management. If someone wore a company hat with the company logo but it was not part of the official uniform, he told management. Nobody in the company liked Kyle. One week, Kyle's coworker took vacation and my boss scheduled me to replace him. The run was pretty easy. It was a commercial day shift, so 90% of the stops were retail stores with only a few $100s in cash. Because the amount of money was so low, nobody ever had a problem with one person jumping out, running in, grabbing the money, and coming back while the second person, usually the driver, stayed with the truck. On this shift, I was the driver, so that was what I did. While Kyle was in the store, I would usually check navigation on my phone, look around the area, make sure there were no obvious threats, make sure I was not blocking anyone, and generally waste a little time. At one stop, Kyle came back while I was just finishing an email. Apparently, he was not happy that I took a few extra seconds to start driving. Without me knowing, he took a picture of me behind the wheel on my phone. I had no idea until the next day. When management came to talk to me about texting and driving, I told them I had no idea what they were talking about. My manager said he had proof I had been doing it, and that if I did it again, I would be written up. I went to talk to another coworker who was also the union representative to figure out what was going on. He told me Kyle had taken a picture of me the day before and complained that I was texting while driving. I was furious. Cue malicious compliance. My shifts with Kyle were 3 13-hour shifts, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. It was now Thursday, our last shift of this run. This shift was not retail pickups. It was the run where we took all the money collected from the previous week and brought it to our provincial depot about 400 kilometers away. The entire run only involved about 30 minutes of actual work and around 9 hours of driving. If you are doing the math, this was one of those runs where if traffic was on your side and you got it done quickly, you could get paid for a lot of unworked time. It was also the last shift of the week, which meant a long, gorgeous summer weekend as soon as we were done. Well, I was going to make sure this shift lasted as long as possible. If Kyle did not want me to break any rules, I would make sure I followed them perfectly. I drove exactly the speed limit the entire way. I also stopped for our full 1-hour lunch break, which we were entitled to, but which I had never seen anyone actually take in all the years I had worked there because of how our pay structure worked. In fact, we ended up so far behind that we reached the major city where our depot was located right at rush hour, which our early start time was specifically designed to avoid. All in all, what should have taken about 9 hours ended up taking 14. That was an extra 5 hours where Kyle had to sit there and watch me drive in silence. To make it even sweeter, a few times during the shift he had to call his wife and let her know he would not be home early enough to go to the cottage and that they would have to leave the next day instead. I later heard from other workers how furious he was and how I had ruined his plans for the weekend. All I could do was smile. To clarify, where I live, going 15 to 20 kilometers per hour above the speed limit is standard. Driving exactly the speed limit usually gets someone riding your rear bumper. Also, our trucks had a maximum speed of 105 kilometers per hour, and most of the drive was either 80 or 100 kilometers per hour. The next one is an entitled People Story. The title of this story is exactly what I heard when I answered a call from my younger brother. For quick context, my stepfather, whom I will call Jim, had liver cancer. My mom needed diaphragm reconstruction, although forgive me if that is not the proper medical term. She was told she would be laid up for 4 to 6 weeks, but that Jim was not in immediate danger, so she should go ahead with the surgery. They were wrong. 2 days after she came home from the hospital, while she could hardly move, Jim went into hospice and passed away that night. My mom was devastated, of course. She and Jim had a great marriage. Her first husband, my awful father, was abusive and cheated on her. Her second husband was a severe alcoholic who, no exaggeration, once tried to murder her. Then there was Jim. Jim was a retired Marine Master Gunnery Sergeant, as rough, tough, and gruff as every stereotype that title brings to mind. My mom was about as liberal as they come, while Jim was basically the opposite. But somehow they made it work, and they absolutely adored each other. She had finally found a good man, and all of us loved him. For context of what is coming, my mom was pretty well off, while Jim came into the marriage with basically nothing. A week after I posted Jim's obituary, I got a frantic call from my younger brother who had been taking good care of Mom. My brother is low to mid-functioning autistic, but he really stepped up when Mom needed him. When I answered, he was screaming that people were taking things out of Mom's house. I asked who was taking things, but all I got was an incoherent, panicked response, so I left work and headed over there. But first I called my older brother. On the off chance there was going to be an altercation, I had to admit that I am pretty clean-cut and probably would not intimidate anyone unless they mistook me for an Internal Revenue Service auditor. My older brother, however, rides a Harley, and you would be hard-pressed to guess whether he was a member of ZZ Top or the Hells Angels. Or both. You would not want to meet him in a dark alley. He looks scary. When I got to Mom's house, I found Jim's adult son from a previous marriage, someone none of us even knew existed, loading things into a flatbed trailer hitched to a big pickup truck. His own son, who was about 12 years old, was helping him. I demanded to know what the hell they thought they were doing. Then his large, unpleasant wife came out of the house, hiked up her sweatpants, and made her way over to us. Long story short, they had rented this trailer and driven all the way from Rochester, New York to Denver, Colorado, and by God, they were going to get what was rightfully theirs. Before things could go any further, both my older brother and the police showed up. Good thing my brother did not arrive before the police because he looked ready to destroy someone. Mom had sensibly called the police because she had no idea what was going on. Apparently, my younger brother had let these people in when they identified themselves. They offered their condolences to Mom, and then the wife started pointing out things throughout the house that she wanted. Her husband then started loading them up. She had this strange idea that everything in a marriage is split 50-50 even after death, and that they were just there to take Jim's half. I am not a lawyer, but I am pretty sure it does not work that way. I got most of this from their explanation to the police, who did not stop my older brother and me from taking everything back out of the trailer and truck bed. The officers were forcing politeness, but they were clearly struggling not to roll their eyes and tell these people to get lost. "We will be back!" the wife shouted as they left empty-handed. Sure enough, they showed up the next day. Mom gave them my phone number, told them I was handling everything, and said the police would be called if they tried to step 1 foot inside her home. Mom told me that Jim had a small rented storage space and that they were welcome to take everything in it. So I gave them the address and met them there. The wife was pretty angry that there was nothing valuable in the 5x5 rented storage closet. While sorting through Jim's things, she tossed his Vietnam medals into the trash. Her husband took some photo albums, but not much else. While she was yelling about what a waste of time this was, their 12-year-old son was standing outside looking embarrassed. I spotted a very old Lionel train set in its original box on a shelf. I handed it to the boy and said, "I am sure your grandfather would have wanted you to have this. It was probably the only thing of real value in there." They left mostly empty-handed, still shouting that I had not heard the last of this. I retrieved the military medals from the trash, and Mom later had them framed. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. About a month later, Mom received some legal-looking document from a lawyer in Rochester demanding full disclosure of assets. I took it to an actual lawyer, and he nearly fell out of his chair laughing. It was not even a court document. There was no lawsuit. It was just an official-looking letter trying to scare Mom into vague compliance. The lawyer advised us not to reply. Just ignore it, he said. So that is exactly what we did. We never heard another word from those people. But honestly, you have to wonder how someone develops such an inflated sense of entitlement that they think 50% of everything inside their dead father's wife's house is automatically theirs. The next one is a petty revenge story. Flying out of Philadelphia after visiting a good friend for a week. I travel pretty frequently and like to make security check as painless as possible for me and everyone else involved, so usually the only thing I need to get on the belt is my carry-on bag, shoes, and phone. I get to the security table, kick off my shoes, throw them in the bin with my phone and boarding pass so there's nothing in my hands. Bag is on my shoulder and bin is in my hands and I'm ready to go. Enter 2 wild Karens. Perhaps they're not full-blown Karens separately, but together their powers have amplified. Combined, the Karens have about 6 bins of toiletries, electronics, shoes, and other nonsense, and they are taking their sweet time. They obviously know this, as moments before I entered the line, Karen 1 had allowed someone to pass on front of them. Anxious to get through as I'm in a tight spot between the Karens in front, the stand where they check your boarding pass and ID behind me, and the table to my left. I cut around the other side to the table and ask Karen 1, "Do you mind if I just jump ahead?" Karen 1 is instantly miffed and responds, "No, and I don't know where you think you're going. That side is blocked off." Not one to stay quiet, I respond. "Just trying to get my stuff on the belt, but fine, take your time." Both Karens ignore me, leave their bins on the table, and proceed to the body scanner. I stand there confused for a moment. Still at the end of the table, about 3 feet from the belt where items are supposed to be placed. Did they expect me to place all their items on the belt for them? No thanks. I grab my bin and bag, place it on the belt, and begin towards the body scanner. The guy who checks the boarding passes stops me to ask if the items left behind are mine. Nope, keep moving forward. I hear him calling across the security checkpoint to ask whose items have been left behind. I apologize to the casual bystander in this petty nonsense. I encountered the Karens on the other side as they look perplexed as my items come through first. I hear Karen 1 whisper to Karen 2, "Our stuff is still on the table on the other side." Yikes. I grab my items and leave, and the Karens have to return to the other side, push their items through, and get re-scanned. Moral of the story? Probably don't be rude to people if you're going to leave your stuff with them. The next one is an entitled parent story. They say they love me, but it never really feels real. Especially with my dad, things always feel unstable around him. Growing up, I was an only child, and my mom was very strict with me. I was not allowed to choose my own clothes until 9th grade. Even though I went to a public school, she made me wear a uniform because she wanted me to look proper. She would punish me for things like losing my glasses or yell at me because I did not eat at school. In that situation, I did not have money in my school account, so I told my mom I needed food. Instead of helping calmly, she got angry, contacted the school and my friend's mom, and somehow I ended up being blamed even though I had not done anything wrong. My dad was not around much during that time because he was always working, and my mom was in nursing school. This was all during elementary school. Middle school was mostly okay, except for 8th grade, when my parents found out I was questioning my sexuality. They told me it was sinful. COVID happened around that time, and I got grounded and had my phone taken away for about a year and a half because of that, because of bad grades that were mostly A's and B's, and because I sent something inappropriate to a friend while trying to explain how I felt about my sexuality. Instead of educating me or having a real conversation with me, they just punished me. I also remember getting a sweater from a friend, and my mom demanded that I return it or she would call the school. Apparently, getting clothes from other people was unacceptable to her. She is still like this now, and I still have to lie about where I get clothes from. High school was awful. My dad once said that people who take their own lives are selfish, even though I had been through a very serious mental health crisis when I was 15. At one point, I had the Bark app installed on my phone. If you know, you know. I was 17 and still not allowed to go to the mall with friends without a parent. I could not wear sweatpants to school because my parents said they were inappropriate. I feel like you get the idea. I am in college now and my parents are paying for it. They are also paying for my room and board and my therapy, so financially they are providing for me, but I still cannot help feeling like I hate them sometimes. Is that wrong of me? I feel uncomfortable around them, especially my dad, and honestly I do not know how to describe some of the things that have happened, but my brain keeps going back to them. There were always weird little moments, like my dad poking my stomach when I wore a crop top and saying, "Well, do not show your stomach if you do not want me to poke it." Or my mom coming into the dressing room with me and examining my clothes to see if they fit correctly, because apparently I was not allowed to have my own opinion about my own clothes. It is just weird. I do not know how else to explain it. Anyway, thank you for watching.